Our second reading this morning has been changed. Initially, I was going to read a piece of poetry from the same poet that Greg read to us earlier today, the piece called Q. Instead, I've decided to read a portion of a book called So You Want to Talk About Race. This is just a couple paragraphs from that book. Until we have made the decision to intentionally dismantle the system of white supremacy and racial oppression, we will simply always have to talk about it. I hope that, to have these conversations about race, we all find opportunities for action and use what we've learned from those conversations to make that action more effective at dismantling all types of oppression. So talk. Please talk. Talk and talk some more. But my goodness, also act, and act now. Because people are now dying in this unjust system. How many lives have been ground up by racial prejudice and hate? How many opportunities have we already lost to move forward? Talk, yes, but act. Act and learn and mess up and learn some more and act again and promise yourselves and others that you will do better. We have to do this. We have to do all of this at once. You see, we have no choice but to learn and to fight at the same time. Because my people have been waiting far too long for their chance to live lives as equal as those others live their lives in what's called our society. Until we've dismantled the system of white supremacy and racial oppression, we will always need to talk about it. From So You Want to Talk About Race. Thank you, Barbara. Before I came out into the sanctuary this morning, I got to speak with Barbara for a minute. And it was one of those conversations that a minister has with the pianist right before a service. So you want some extra music here? Well, what about this? How slow should this be? How quick here? And we came to an agreement. What I've been calling traveling music, those little pieces of music between so many words, actually is breathing music. So what you often hear is a bunch of words, a reading or a poem, and then you hear that music, where the person at the piano goes back to the hymn we just had, or teases you with a piece of the hymn we're going to have. That's breathing music, simply to allow all of us to move onto the same page and get ready for the next thing, to give us some space to breathe in. When I decided to write about why I hate Black History Month, I had no idea the number of emails and questions that would bring up. But before I talk about that, first let me give voice to a few names that are familiar to all of you. Shirley Chisholm, Michelle Obama, Althea Gibson, Hank Aaron, Arthur Ashe, Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie, Barbara Jordan and Dorothy Height, the poet Langston Hughes, Francis Harper, one that we claim as a UU, rightfully so, Bessie Coleman, Booker T. Washington. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Oprah Winfrey, Sojourner Truth, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, George Washington Carver, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, Barack Obama. Wonderful people, intelligent people. But most importantly, this month, Black people. Black people whose story needs to be told, whose story is in danger of disappearing unless we continue to repeat their stories. Black people whose story is part of the American story, whose stories all matter. So yeah, this morning, first, I say some of the names. Second, back to the title of the sermon, a disclaimer. I don't actually hate Black History Month. But since we began publicizing that title, I realized it's such a good conversation starter. Not one, not two, not three, but several UUCA folks have asked me about those exact words. Do you really hate Black History Month, Rev CTC? I imagine it can be hard for you. It's a long month. Oh, but you always say it's only 28 days. I don't understand. Why don't you like it? I mean, it's a way of recognizing your people. I must admit, excellent sermon title. But the real truth is this. I don't hate Black History Month. I dislike the way Black History Month is celebrated, recognizing an assortment of brown-skinned overachievers, while small towns and sprawling cities and corporate America packages the correct, accepted versions of Black history, and then puts it on billboards and the sides of buses and banners and public service announcements. What happens is Black History Month is shilled to the masses. I also believe that Black History Month probably does as much harm as good. It boils down the collective journey of Black Americans into a handful of programs, of specific signage, of concerts. It becomes a 28-day party for Blackness. And then in March, what happens? We put it away till next year, right? We resume the usual state of forgetfulness and denial and the sheen of unimportance. I also know that it would be extremely unfortunate if mainstream America decided that the annual emphasis on this particular segment of the American story was no longer important at all, was not worth our attention, even during the shortest month of the year. So no, I don't hate Black History Month. Instead, like many others, I question the need for Black History Month at all. You know, the rumbling really starts in January, after the end of the year holidays, but before MLK weekend. That's when the rhetoric and the questions about the need for February to continue being designated as Black History Month start to swirl in the atmosphere of radio and TV frequencies and is all over cyberspace. That's when the discussion of whether or not Black History Month is meaningful anymore at all slides from the mouths of the talking heads. The smooth-voiced Anderson Cooper on CNN, the strident preachy tones of Reverend Al Sharpton on MSNBC, the probing patter of Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. All of them ask the same question every January. Is Black History Month significant anymore? Is it actually needed? In that space after New Year's Day, but before Dr. King's birthday, the touchy-feely conversations and the difficult but important questions begin to rear their less than politically correct heads. Is Black History Month really still needed? Is Black History Month actually relevant? Do we even know why we have it or where it began? Should the entire month of February, the shortest month of the year, be designated and marked to honor one specific group of Americans just because of the color of their skin? For me, in that January space, before the preaching on MLK Sunday, the special gospel concerts, the African drumming event, the middle school essay writing contests, that level of murmuring and public disagreement and heated discussion starts to get wearying. Every year in January, in the CVS, at work, on the metro, in the doctor's office, and around the dinner table, of course, people are asking, do we need Black History Month? Oh, and what should we do for Black History Month? How are we going to recognize it this year? There's that conversation with a sense of urgency, like we forgot it was coming, and we really better do something, or we won't look like we know that it was coming. And then there's meetings, there's committees, there's task force, there's recruitment of singers. We have had the most amazing musicians from George Mason who never stepped foot in this building before Black History Month. We made a plan. It's a good plan. But it did happen in January, and we've known this month was coming for a year. That then made me ask the question, well, is Black History Month possibly outlived its usefulness? Has designating February as the time to recognize, honor, and celebrate the perseverance, the intelligence, and the success of African Americans lost its purpose? Sometimes. I believe exactly that. I believe it's lost its purpose. Because Black History Month reminds me how deeply aware I am that the history of Black Americans has been lied about, sanitized, and often left completely out of history books. I know every single day that the full history of the African American experience is not consistently and truthfully being told. We leave out the tough, icky, sticky, blisteringly painful parts because they make us uncomfortable. Our country and its citizens have made tremendous strides. You all know this. Mandatory segregation is a thing of the past. You can't do that in restaurants, in schools, in community spaces, at swimming pools, in movie theaters, or in churches. You can't have a sign above a water fountain that says coloreds only. You can't tell people because of the color of their skin the numerous things they cannot do. But some brown-skinned men and women are still set aside. Even though we've reached the place where they are gainfully employed and working at all levels of small businesses and major corporations, some of them are still set aside. All those things are true. Large segments of the US population understand the history clearly. Larger sections do not. The list of names that I read you at the top of this sermon were all familiar. Althea Gibson, Arthur Ashe, Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, George Washington Carver, I love that name, Booker T. Washington. Even though all those things are true and we are recognizing those important men and women, there are so many who don't see the real picture of Black life every day. Instead, they see stereotypes and predetermined ideas about the current life and the deep history of Black Americans. So, while I understand that many believe Black History Month is extremely important and they want to continue acknowledging my ancestors and a seemingly endless list of Black heroes and sheroes, I remain unsettled and unsure about how the month is handled. As a child, a youth, and even as a young adult, February had very little meaning for me. I was not a student of any type of history. I didn't study American history more than they said I had to get out of high school. I didn't study world history more than I had to achieve my bachelor's degree. I thought that my life was in front of me and saw little importance in looking backwards. I didn't care about history at all. And if possible, I actually felt less about Black history, that singular moment in time that was supposed to mean so much to me. My life also wasn't connected to particularly painful experiences of racism, of my people being underrepresented or isolated or not included or discriminated against over and over and over. So I lived in a bubble, on military bases, and then on suburban cul-de-sacs. Also, my age plays a factor in my lack of connection. I was 6 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Between that, I basically, I played, skipped, and hopscotch through the whole civil rights movement. In my life, integration had arrived. It was real. I received a mixed, not separate but equal, but a mixed education. I lived in a decent suburban home. I had friendly white neighbors. Things were pretty well, they were pretty equal. Even when I was the only Black kid in the classroom, I honestly don't remember being called names, other than about my size, because I was a tubby kid. And I was the funny, chunky Black kid. I didn't feel hopeless or powerless. I didn't grow up blaming the unknown, all-seeing man for the conditions of society. Frankly, painfully for me to remember now, I didn't think about the centuries of my people's oppression or believe we needed a month-long celebration to talk about it or not talk about it or to overcome it or to make us all feel better. That was as a child. And then the thing happened, right? I grew up, I got married, we had children, 2 gorgeous biracial children. Their handsome white father and me sat and looked at these babies and were like, oh, what are we gonna tell them? What's the real story? When my children entered the world and we started telling them the stories, when they came home from school, we realized what they were learning at school wasn't the stories they were learning at home. There was a huge disconnect. There was a year when my son wore a peanut costume in the school play, George Washington Carver, and asked questions about the way Black folks used to be treated. They loved his costume. They did not care for his questions. There was the year that my daughter decided to enter a contest to draw a picture that would be on the side of the bus. When she made the person in the picture a soldier in an army helmet, lighter than the darkest brown crayon in the Corolla box, they asked her to change that. Fine picture, but can you make him a little browner? And she took her entry back and tore it up. What she was learning at home did not jive with what was happening in school. I had to admit to them every single day, in one way or another, that racism was not just in the past, that our country was terribly broken, and that the color of their skin mattered more to some people than it probably did to them. I had to connect the dots for my kids between Frederick Douglass, MLK, Barbara Jordan, and Julian Bond. I had to explain that jazz was uniquely American and created by African Americans. I remembered the summer I introduced my daughter to the poetry of Langston Hughes and Billie Holiday's powerful, painful song about the strange fruit that hangs from trees in the South. What I learned from them was that you can't figure out who you are without paying homage and learning about where you came from. We, and I am using we in the broadest sense possible, we as a people can't determine how we arrived here at this horrible, excruciating intersection we are living in without looking backwards and acknowledging where we came from. Without studying the entire story, including the parts we would rather not see, feel, or re-experience, we can't begin to right wrongs and write the next chapter of our shared story if we don't look backwards first. The way that Black History Month is celebrated now is problematic. By honoring this odd assortment of overachievers while businesses and well-meaning local, state, and national government agencies do their very best to publicize the importance of Black History Month with accompanying concerts and staged readings and sermons like this one, we miss the boat. The problem is this: sitting aside 1 month a year does just as much harm as good. We pay a very steep bill for distilling the entire journey of a people down to a handful of names and repeating them over and over in a 28-day cycle. At the end of February, things will go back to normal. We'll resume our normal state of semi-indifference and overwhelming forgetfulness for another year. The way that we have chosen to handle African American History Month actually, I'll say it again, does more harm than good. But I'm not hopeless. I think we can find and build a better way, a way of telling the whole truth, the ugly story of slavery and racism and colored-only signs, the truth about affirmative action and how it worked and it didn't work, the story of not being able to buy a home because of predatory lending practices. We can also mix in Oprah Winfrey's success story and the hope all of us felt when Barack Obama became the first Black president in our country. We can honor, we can acknowledge, we can affirm, and we can remember. Even the hurt can be remembered. But we cannot simply decide only to talk about Hank Aaron or Bessie Smith or Barbara Jordan. In the same way that I have watched the Jewish community and culture pledge to never forget the near destruction of their people by Hitler and the condoning silence that surrounded him, it is imperative that we too remember the agony, the suffering, the sacrifices, and the successes of our ancestors. It's in critical condition this Black History Month. We need to figure out how to fix it. We've got to publicly remember the lives lost alongside the success stories. We've got to weave the good, the bad, the painful, the beautiful together into an intersection that makes Black history American history. So do I hate Black History Month? No. Do we really need a Black History Month? Yes, more than ever. But if we're going to continue setting February aside, we can and must do it better. We must do it better. I'll say a line you've heard me say before. Our children are depending upon it. The stories we have heard and reheard are not enough. We have work to do. We are capable and able of making the shift. I'm going to close this morning with a poem that was crafted by Poet Laureate Maya Angelou. She titled this poem, Human Family. It's one of my personal favorites. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious. Some thrive on comedy. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight. Brown and pink and beige and purple, tan, nearly blue and white. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world, not yet one common man. I know 10,000 women called Jane and Mary Jane, but I've not seen any two who were exactly the same. Mirror twins are different, although their features jibe, and lovers think quite different thoughts when lying side by side. We love and lose in China. We weep on English moors. We laugh and moan in Guinea. We thrive on Spanish shores. We seek success in Finland, are born and die in Maine in minor ways. We differ. In major, we are the same. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Yes, we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Say that last sentence with me. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We cannot prosper. We cannot live in peace. We are, in the end, inescapably involved in one and others' lives. Racism, classism, ageism, heterosexism, other oppressions are not going to simply disappear. You know and I know we have work to do. I am hopeful. Let's get busy. Our destiny is on the precipice. The idea of living fully and joyously in the beloved community is not lost. Oh my gosh, it's waiting for us to claim and take the steps to get there. Amen, and blessed be.